So I think we'll get started, but if I could, first of all, have any current Swan Creek members come up here, and we'll just want to introduce you as a Swan Creek member, and then I have a little nosegay to keep with the spirit of an old organization. Actually, I didn't have long pins to make them into corsages, so they became nosegays. So let's see. So I'm Eileen Kellor. I'm going to be the presenter today, and I will not take a nosegay for myself because I couldn't hold it. But Mary Kay, can you just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mary Kay Clark. I've been a member for, it'll be 20 years next year. And let's see, I think I've been president for about 18 years. Oh, and you'll hear in Eileen's presentation that it started at my grandmother's house back in 1915. So anyway, I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad all of you are here.
I'm Carol Kinney. Carol Kinney, and I'm the vice president currently. And I've been for quite a while too. Okay. And well, let's see. My husband is here, but it was, and your mother belonged to it, right? And your grandmother. And did she just miss it by 1 year? So she came, what, 1916? Yeah. So that's about it. We really enjoy getting together. It's fun.
There.
I'm Gina Kinney Barton. I'm her husband's sister. And so the lineage is pretty much the same. And I've been a member since 2008 or 9, something like that. And yeah, it's a fun place to get together with the neighbors and keep in contact.
Hi, I'm Debbie Larson-Henke. My mother was Beatrice Larson, who lived in the community. She's the one who joined Swan Creek in the late 1940s. At that time still, it had to be, you know, the whole heritage, but she moved to the area at that time, and she went to one meeting, and the group had to vote to decide if they were going to let a person in who wasn't part of the beginning group. So they voted her in. So I don't know how many years I've been a member, probably around 10. When I came back here and had retired from my job, I was taking my mother to the meetings so that she wouldn't miss any. And of course, this group comes up and says, Debbie, you've got to come in and join us. So where I had thought I would just have this be my mother's getaway from the family, they didn't accept that, so I started in. But it has been nice to be back with all the neighbors in this area.
Yeah, great. So, and here's yours. So the key you're going to find here is if you want any kind of recruitment for an activity, just ask Mary Kay, because she's great at arm twisting. So Carol is going to do a quick introduction, and thank you all, esteemed ladies. Want me to hold it for you?
No, I
Okay.
I'll just have to try to remember to hold her. Well, she told you. I'm Carol Kinney, and I'm currently vice president. And so happy that you all could come and join us this afternoon, because I'm sure there were lots of things you could be doing, but I'm glad you're here. And as somebody probably mentioned, Swan Creek Sewing Circle was founded in 1915. Well, that's a long time ago. Let's see, 1915 and 2023, you got 108 years, I guess. And when Bill and I got married, my mother-in-law, Mary Kinney, told me all about the interesting things that the club was doing, and maybe I would like to join too. And of course, she used to just come and pull up with her car when it was time to go, so I went, and I you know how mothers and mother-in-laws are. Anyway, I did enjoy it a lot, and I stuck with it. And what else I want to tell you? But to think that this club has been active since 1915, and there's actually the minutes back there, starting from 1959. So I mean, that's really nice. And all the minutes are there because I looked through them. They're in a tin box. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you about? The whole idea, because these people were, in farming areas, was for the women to have something to do that was fun and to get together with one another. At least that's been my understanding of it. And now, there's so many things going on, things are different, but they wanted a club to get together. And that's where Amanda Culp came in, and she had the first meeting. And apparently there weren't too many who were there the first time, maybe 15, but after that there was like 30 that actually came to the next month. And they liked meeting on Wednesdays, and believe it or not, that's when we meet, the first Wednesday of every month. So let's see, what else can I tell you, because a lot of that we've been talking about here. The theme of their club would always be neighborliness. And, okay, I think I pretty much covered it, or they talked about it. And Eileen, your mother and your grandmother were members?
Correct. Not legacy, not original, but
Not original.
they were invited, yeah.
Yeah. But Eileen's always been so enthused and so wonderful to have in the club. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and you can tell them whatever you want.
Thank you. So and I neglected to mention that my official role in the Sewing Circle is secretary, which is then how Carol enlisted me to be on the Historical Society board, why I'm also currently secretary. So, those things continue. So you've heard this theme already, that Swan Creek Sewing Circle was founded with the purpose of neighborliness. Whether that's a real word or not, I don't know, but we've been using it since 1915. I'm a third generation member, which means that my grandmother was a member, and my mother was a member, and I'm a member. One of my sisters that lives locally is also a member, and I have 3 sisters still surviving that live across the country, and they're sort of ex officio members that get emails but don't actually attend unless they happen to be in town. So why do I find this so interesting? It actually, when I started doing genealogy, I was really excited to find out that our first relatives came like 1700. I thought, oh yay, it's the daughters of the American Revolution. And then I learned a little bit more and found out that they were loyalists and went to Canada. So there went that one. So I did learn that I had this legacy, that I could be part of Swan Creek. And when I retired in 2016, Mary Kay took my arm and twisted it and said, there's no reason for you not to join, and I did. And what I've discovered is the more I learn about the Sewing Circle, or the Circle, the more I really appreciate it from a historical and cultural perspective. And I think its story has a lot of similarities to what other people might have experienced. I will say that I've done a similar presentation to a couple of guilds, a sewing guild and a quilt guild, and at both of those, people came up afterwards and said, oh my gosh, I completely forgot that my grandmother had something like this, or my mother did. So I think even if you aren't a Fitchburg native, or maybe don't belong to a guild or a group, you may have stories in your past that are similar. 39 years ago, I got married, and the Swan Creek Sewing Circle threw me a wedding shower. It was at Rachel Haight's home, and among those in attendance, for those of you who know Fitchburg names, was Frances Gundlach and Barb Stoneman and Margie Blaney and Rachel Haight, of course. My mother was there. My younger sister Annette was there as my guest. And what I find kind of fun is that the acting secretary, when I look at the minutes from this meeting, the acting secretary was Margie Blaney. So I don't know if she just stood in or what, but she's someone who now I've become to know as an adult 39 years later. So what I'm going to run through today, and not necessarily in this exact order, is the history of the Sewing Circle, the themes that I've seen throughout its history, the circle in COVID, because we certainly were affected, similarities to current groups, whether they're women's groups or others, what role it played in my life that I look back now and see, why does it continue, and then of course the obligatory questions. And I will add that afterwards we have cake provided by the Sewing Circle and nut cups, which you'll find are a great cultural significance. And we also have a lot of materials around the room that reflect Swan Creek and its history, because it's really done a remarkable job of maintaining records and in its history. So if you can see up here, I don't know if you can, but the circled green right there, that's my grandmother Caroline, and this is my mother Florence. And what I think is important to know is that they didn't necessarily get along very well. And this was probably one of the very first shared activities that they had. So for me personally, it's important because it's an activity that the two of them shared, and whether it was reluctant or not, I have no idea, but it was a shared activity. Location-wise, this is Dane County, and what you'll see here is, of course, Fitchburg, whoops, right around here. So geographically, at that point, Fitchburg, you know, it's a city now. It was a rural township most of my entire life, and it was rural. It was farmland. It was marshland. It didn't have apartments and buildings and what you see now. So between, you know, the south end of Madison and the bustling community of Oregon, there was not a lot. So it was pretty rural. Geographically, when we look at Fitchburg, the area that this covered was up in that upper right-hand corner. So it would be what had been affiliated with the Swan Creek School, which is where the circle drew its name. A lot of schools had mothers groups or other activities, so it was not unusual for a group to have an identity that was associated with a school. So you see that that's Fitchburg, but we're going to slide over and see that it touched over into Dunn. So if you look at the area now, that area is really pretty much where Terravessa is. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but that's where it is. So it's on that border of Fitchburg and the town of Dunn. And as you see, we're going to find historical evidence that these were long-standing people in those areas. All right, so of course this is 1917. It's not the car that would have been used, but it's an example of the kind of vehicle that would have been available to those who actually had a vehicle. It certainly wasn't very roadworthy for winter or mud. Inclement weather would have been pretty uncomfortable. And the reality is that for those who didn't have a car, they were using a horse and wagon. I mean, that's what it was. That was the mode of transportation. So it wasn't like we can do now, just go in our garage, get in our car, turn on the seat heater, and go to Swan Creek and, you know, never have to get our hair wet. I'm sharing this. This is reflective of the Oregon School District, but it's where the one-room schoolhouses were. Because, as I mentioned, the schoolhouses were really kind of the logical organizing focus for this rural community. So what you see up here in this area would have been Swan Creek. This is Lakeview. We have Syene, which is familiar to some people in this room. And then we would go down here. Here's Oregon, for example. So this right here is the area that we're talking about. And I will put a plug in if you haven't checked it out yet. We do have a display in the Fitchburg room. It's all the one-room schoolhouses that had existed in Fitchburg, their location now relative to where school districts are. And we were fortunate to get actual artifacts from at least 8 of the schools. And a few people in this room have actually shared some things that I won't name names, but they're in there. So we hope you will check that out. This is the home where Swan Creek first met. As was mentioned, Mary Kay's grandma, Amanda, known then in all formal circles as Mrs. Fred Culp, held the first meeting. And one of the things that is popular to say is that the men said it would never last. Of course it wouldn't, because it wasn't their idea. So, you know, that's a pretty, Mary Kay, was this farm familiar? Was it still standing, functioning when you were alive?
My grandma passed in 57, and I was born in 57, so I just know it from the outside.
Okay,
I don't recall ever being inside.
So that's where this all started.
What road would that have been on?
Can you describe where it was, Mary Kay?
It's Larson Road now.
Okay, so right in the town of Dunn border, basically.
Yep. And this is Amanda. And one of Mary Kay's cousins, who was also a culp, a classmate of mine as well, had put together a really thorough history of Amanda and her life and the culp family that she started. So she was a newcomer. She was not from the area, and whether that was part of her need for neighborliness or not, I don't know. But I think it's a good example that shows that people were always coming into this community. This is the very first minutes from the Swan Creek Sewing Circle from December 1st, 1915. And we actually have that back there in the metal box. So as Carol mentioned, what's really remarkable is that we have every set of minutes from the Sewing Circle, with a couple of exceptions. Mary Kay's late sister Pat took some in shorthand, and we don't know for sure what they say. And I have a bunch that are, have been printed out, but have not, and have been read and approved per our formal policies, but they aren't actually in the archives yet. But it's remarkable because it is literally 108 years of monthly documentation of these women's lives and their activities. I've often said that if I wasn't retired and cherished my free time, it would be a really fascinating topic for a book. So they started out. They established bylaws, the very first meeting. They were going to meet the first Wednesday of the month, and I love the language. The language was the hour to suit the pleasure of the hostess. So very formal. They were going to host in alphabetical order, so very clear. The privilege of exchange, 5 cents, which meant that when you attended, you were going to give 5 cents to attend. Refreshments would be furnished by the hostess, but limited to being limited to 5 articles of food under penalty of fine. So this is a theme that that really struck me throughout, is that things were made very specific, very egalitarian, and very equalized. So it was not going to be a matter of, let's say, Mary Kay just having 10 fabulous things, and then Gina just goes to Costco and gets a, little salami or something. So it was very specific. Paper plates and napkins would be furnished by the circle, and then they later evolved to metal lap trays and glass coffee and snack sets. What I want to show you here, and you can look at it later, this is a memory I have of these trays would go home with the person who was going to have the next meeting. So if your mother came back with a big stack of trays wrapped with a piece of cotton sheeting, you knew that you were going to have Swan Creek. So later you can see Debbie brought this. This was something that her mother very specifically told her she needed to keep. It's a couple of the metal trays, some doily that she would put on it, and then a hostess set, a snack set, a very lovely kind of aqua colored that was always used for the Swan Creek meeting. So that was Debbie conceded she hasn't used that, but she sets a very lovely table full of lots of Danish items and lots of swans. Committees would be appointed as their need arose. So again, they were coming up with a structure. This wasn't just let's come hang out. We're going to do things. We're going to have a process. And the roll call for each meeting would be determined prior to the meeting. So this is one of the things that has really struck me as very unique. Instead of saying, Eileen, here, roll call was something. Would it be a recipe? Maybe it's a favorite memory. So what I've derived from this is that it really was a way that it ensured participation by everybody. You might have someone who wasn't really super, social or was uncomfortable, yet that roll call gave that person an opportunity to be part of the group. And that I've never seen that in any other organization that I belong to. The next meeting, the year 2016 was really busy. The second meeting, the roll call was a good recipe. Not a bad one, but a good one. Because, you got to be clear on those things. Third meeting, this one really I thought was amazing. The third meeting, they were discussing consolidated schools. So has that gone away? No, it looks a little different, but the topic of schools in Fitchburg has been around forever. The fourth meeting, I'm reading into this, the roll call was discussion of consolidated schools and reading of favorite poems, because I'm guessing maybe some people didn't want to talk about that, or they weren't comfortable and they would rather read a poem. So we've kind of continued that. Usually, our roll call might be a favorite memory or something, but there's always the option to just share anything. Fifth meeting, bring a pieced block 12 inches square. Now, Kristen, you'll relate to this. Kristen's a friend I know through quilting. At the sixth meeting, The subject of the peace block again brought up. Mrs. Herbert Lawler should purchase the material and choose help to cut the same at a time and place convenient to those members. So this tells me that people didn't make those blocks on their own. So they decided that they were going to provide the fabric, get them cut, and then where's the excuse to not make that block? So I think many of us in groups still see that kind of thing where you have a great idea for participation and then that follow through takes a little bit longer. The date of the September 1916 meeting was changed on account of county fair tractor demonstration, etc., coming so near or before our regular date. So they knew things were going to conflict, but they didn't cancel, they just rescheduled because that's how important this was to them. August continued, and this again showed that they were really looking at keeping things very egalitarian. They approved the purchase of a 2-gallon coffee pot and 3 dozen spoons and forks. So again, the hostess didn't have to provide this. This stuff traveled. Children of 4 years and over are taxable. So until you're 4, you can snack on that stuff, but after 4, you're going to be charged. So no free. However, the hostess and family are exempt from regular charges. So this is just really fascinating because it tells me that as that year progressed, these things came up and they thought, how do we do this? How do we set it? So from the very beginning, there's been a really clear process and structure. And then in December of 1916, the records showed their first service where they sent flowers to an ill member. And that still continues, not so much flowers, but it's a routine practice that if one of our members or one of our lifetime members is ill and misses a meeting, we send a card. And we've learned, for example, through Debbie's mom, who was in a nursing home the last years of her life, how much that meant to her and how she noticed and mentioned to Debbie that she hadn't received things from Swan Creek for a couple of months. So it was very important. Their activities often reflected outside events. So this wasn't just getting together and having fun. In October of 1918, the records record that there was a questionnaire from the Dane County Council of Defense regarding the Circle's war activities. So whether this was being done to make sure that groups were not engaging in anti-American activities or if they were just documenting the support that was being provided, I don't know. But it was an interesting thing to find. In December of 2029, which was the first meeting after the crash, they voted to dispense with gifts to babies and of blankets to brides and grooms and silver wedding gifts. So right away they were like, nope, we know times are tight. We're not going to be giving these gifts anymore. And when I went through the minutes, I just kind of pulled some random ones and found some 1966. They had a report about Dane County's alcoholism director and what his goals were. And one of them was to help high school students understand the risks of alcohol. And sadly, I think we know how effective that's been, but it's Wisconsin. And then in July of 1966, one of the members prepared a quiz and then gave a short program about Social Security benefits. So again, these are mostly farm women, mostly rural women. Many of them didn't work outside the home or have their own occupation. So Social Security and what that was going to mean would have been a very important topic for them. So these are just some, again, I didn't read through all 108 years of minutes, but some things that I've pulled out that show that this was social, but this was also maybe not activism, but educational. So to control membership, they did have to put some boundaries on. It became very popular, and you can see why. I mean, it was a great opportunity. So after a short period of time, the new members were limited to daughters and daughters-in-law of charter members. And given that many of these were large Catholic families, that still meant that it grew pretty quickly. At points where the membership fell, prospective members were invited as a guest, like Debbie's mom, who then was formally invited, and sometimes it even was a formal invitation. I've found some things in our archives here that are actually from someone who declined the written invitation that she was given to join because they were at a different point in their life and were going to be leaving the community. So it was very, very formal. As a geographic span of membership, it grew. Transportation improved, roads got better, people ended up having cars, schools closed or consolidated, so that little group didn't exist as much. And women had competing interests and additional social opportunities. So it didn't necessarily have quite as much appeal as it did initially. But it was still popular, and it was a big thing to get an invitation. So some Swan Creek names you still see on road and street signs. You're going to see Lawler, Henshaw, Larson, Birkin, who by marriage, because Mary Kay's sister Pat married a Birkin, and we know there's a Birkin Road out there. Hammersley, that wasn't from Fitchburg, but it was a family that was from the area. Mance, Hates, Blaney's, Clayton's, and Stoneman. So just a few of the names that still have recognition either by a place name or by people who are perhaps selling sweet corn. And Haight, we do have one of our members who has taken great efforts to restore and have the farmstead recognized as a historic property. So these are people who've been around a long time. So they also formally observed benchmarks. This was a big thing. So the photos you see here were from the 1941 Centennial Parade in Oregon, Wisconsin. Because I think most of the people from this area that Swan Creek covered really identified probably more with Oregon. That's where they probably did their shopping. They maybe did their lumber yards. It's where the kids, at the point where Swan Creek School closed, for example, in the 20s, they went to Oregon. So this was a big deal. They issued formal invitations. Anybody here from Oregon, Wisconsin, other than me? Mary Kay? Yeah, Margaret? So the Oregon Observer was a really important thing. And if you had things in the Oregon Observer, that meant something had really happened. So throughout our scrapbooks, you'll see records of, in the Oregon Observer, Swan Creek Sewing Circle met at the home of so-and-so, and then it might even say what the dessert was. So this was a pretty big thing. So in 1936, my mother and grandmother were invited to join, and they were from Lakeview. And I'll show you the map of that briefly. But for context, my grandmother was Caroline Eileen Kellor. She was from a Norwegian immigrant family who was mostly in Stoughton, but then also DeForest. And she was actually born in Dane County, like about 1880 or something. And my mother, so she was very, very Lutheran. My mother, Florence Peschel Kellor, was from Waterloo, Wisconsin, and met my husband when she went to St. Mary's Nursing School, and his sister was a classmate of hers. My mother, for those of you who might know Waterloo, it was a very German community. In fact, my mother's parents were native German speakers. She didn't speak German because, of course, that was suppressed during World War I. You do not speak German. And she was very Catholic. And she had an accent. And she also was fairly dark complexioned. So what we learned is that our grandmother was very much not happy with the choice of a bride because she wasn't Lutheran, she had an accent, and she wasn't the person that apparently had been tagged as the person my father was supposed to marry. So my mother married in 1934, and then in 1936, she and my grandmother were invited to join. And I do know that from talking to my older siblings, for my grandmother in particular, this was a really big thing because she wasn't from Oregon. You know, she didn't know people. The Kellor family had been in Oregon since the 1850s, but she was not from there. So this was really a way for her to have a connection. And this is Lakeview, the area of the intersection of Highway MM and Highway B, which has been known by different names. GPS calls it Highway now, but we call it was Highway 14. That was so my grandfather had had built and had a store. This was all made of fieldstones that my father took over in the early 30s, and then my grandparents had purchased the Getz Stagecoach House. So this is where Lakeview was, and where there was actually a school at Lakeview as well. So again, we're looking at the school as the community and how they extended that. Again, just looking at the formal recognition and what they did. On the right, we see that there was a 25th anniversary event and people were invited. It would cost people, I forget, 40 cents. and it was at Felly's at 927 South Park Street. So again, very formal. And one thing to note throughout all the documentation, you can see that here. This is Mrs. Joe Haight, Mrs. C. Gunlock, and I think that probably was Clem. Is that right? Yeah, Margaret's shaking her head. And over here, again, anybody who was married, it was Mrs. So-and-so. So if you ever in any of these old documents saw someone who was given with their first name, that was an unmarried daughter or an unmarried member. The Tipple sisters, I don't know them, but they're in there as the Tipple sisters. They apparently were an unmarried pair of sisters that were circle members. So this is their 50th birthday, and to show a photo here, the yellow up here, the yellow is my mother, Florence, and then this is my grandmother, Caroline. And what you can see, if you could really read it, is that they have their names there now. We have Elsie Blaney, we have Caroline Kellor. They're no longer identified by their husband or their late husband's name. So this would have been 1965. So again, what you see is that culturally things, whether this was the Sewing Circle or whether it was Butler Delaney at the Oregon Observer using his journalistic skills to keep up with the times, I don't know. But you see that was reflected there. This is one of my favorite pictures. This was from 1952, and it was a big event. It was honoring the honorary members, which were the lifetime members, and so it was the circle members that were over 70. And very big event. My older siblings say they remember our grandmother, who's circled there in the yellow, just spending really a lot of time thinking about what to wear. And this is one of Gina's and Bill's relatives, Kinney. The waitress was Ruth Blaney, and I have to admit I don't remember the exact connection, except I do know she was related to the Blaneys. But the thing that gets me about this is in this photo, my grandmother was 71, and I'm only 5 years from that. So I'm really hoping that that's not my style of dress in 5 years. So the question is, did they sew? Well, do book clubs read? Sometimes. So the minutes show that at early meetings they did. They helped the hostess with mending, tying quilts. It was, a sewing circle. I remember both this and then the Altar Society through a Holy Mother Consolation that would meet in the evenings on occasion. I remember helping them roll bandages, strips of white torn sheets that were rolled into bandages and then sent away for use for medical purposes. So that there was that kind of service and kind of a quasi-sewing. At various points, the circle made quilts as wedding gifts for members' children or to families in need. An example was 2 families who had lost their possessions in a house fire. But now, as I said, sewing, it's kind of like reading. You were organized because of your shared interest, but you're not really there to sew. Some examples of service. This I think is a really important theme throughout. You can see these women from the very beginning felt a need and an obligation to always be active in the community and to provide service. So examples of some of the things they did is that at some point the donated dues were collected and given to the Red Cross. That was during World War I. They compiled scrapbooks of local events and sent them to local servicemen that were serving. They made annually donations to many causes, and reading through the minutes, there are things that I'd totally forgotten about, like Morningside Sanitarium. Well, that's a flash from the past. Central Colony, certainly not called that anymore. And more currently, we've been supporters of a lot of Three Gates therapeutic stables outside of Oregon, and some others. And one thing that I do remember, it must have been in the mid-70s, and my mother was talking about Swan Creek and that they were deciding what they were going to be donating for that year. And one of the groups that she mentioned was the domestic abuse program. And I just thought, wow, how amazing. Here's an organization that was probably much needed throughout this time. There maybe would have even been women who would have been in those positions and didn't have services, but they were looking at ways that they could provide service and support the community. the minutes are also kind of graphic. One of the gifts they gave was to the Gilbersons, who are destitute. So again, that must have been a pretty severe situation, given that none of these families were really rolling in wealth. I mean, I can speak for my family, and I'm sure Mary Kay's and others. You did not have a lot of extra money. More recently, we've done some service. We've made mastectomy pillows, done some bookmarks for the senior center, and have tied blankets for Project Linus. So we're still doing it, but our service now is mostly being an annual donation to an organization. Nut cups, so generational differences have come about. This one, nut cups were a big thing. I remember as a child going to showers or weddings, and there was that nut cup. You know, it might have Jordan almonds or some kind of horrible mint, but it was a really big deal. So when, and Debbie had shared that when she joined the circle, her mother made sure that she realized that nut cups were a big thing. And this little thing about a cupcake liner, that's not a nut cup. That just would not work. This is much more the right kind of nut cup. So we have some examples up here of perhaps nut cups over time. But the other part that I think is, again, generational, my sister Marilyn, who is 87, and I think Bill knew my sister when she was living here still as a young person, her grandchildren were very active in hockey. And one of them was a goalie. And so when Marilyn was talking one time about nut cups, her grandkids looked at her and he said, "Grandma, what are you talking about?" So, and it had not even occurred to her that there was a different meaning to a nut cup. So meetings were a big deal. You had to prepare, you had to clean your house. There was a program, and I don't know for sure if the person hosting was responsible for the program or not, but I've seen some notes. It seems like that might have been the case. There was a roll call that was probably decided the meeting before, and now I know Mary Kay makes an effort for us to figure that out in advance, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And there were alternate meeting sites. So as early as the 20s, the group would take field trips. And again, this was a way that this group, maybe as an individual, they couldn't go to the Dells. And I think there's a photo in the archive somewhere of a couple of the members on a push car or something on a railroad track. How could they do that if they had their kids with them and they're having to supervise? So the field trips were an opportunity to learn something new, but also to take part in an activity that they might not have been able to as an individual. And the traveling lap trays, those had to come and go. I mean, they were important. So how did it influence me as a child? And I didn't really think about this as a child because it was just a given. You know, this was what it was. But what I learned is that women really deserve the opportunity to gather together on a regular basis. They deserve to be able to take that time and spend time together. Again, looking over the historical aspects, I see that by establishing consistent standards and participation expectations, they level the playing field. If you were going to be a member and you hosted a meeting, you knew what you had to do. You also knew how much it was going to cost, and you knew what part you were going to put into that. So it was very much a leveling field. That formal and informal community service is important and it's valued. I mean, I just know from the time I was little, that was just a given. It never would have occurred to me that there's not an element of my time that should not be spent doing something for someone else. I learned local history. Now, as a newer member, I'm really learning it because I'm connecting all these, you know, who married who and who's related to who and how that goes. But it also kind of was a way to sort of learn informally old-time ways. And so I'll just show an example, and you're welcome to look at this afterwards. But in this, these are from 1938, which means they weren't photographed, but these were hand-typed with carbon paper recipe books. So I have both my mother's and my grandmother's. So what I remember learning in here are things like butter the size of an egg in a recipe, or bake in a warm oven, okay? Or some of the best ones would just be the list of ingredients and it would say bake. So it's a lot like, you know, the Great British Baking Shows or whatever, where they just give you these minimal instructions. But these cookbooks have been fascinating too, because they were, like now, these are the recipes people really valued. So apparently dates were really big. There are several recipes about dates, because those were a treat. There's the Beale family plum pudding that was in there. So that was always a mystery, like, wow, people actually have a plum pudding. There's a puffed rice candy, which is really just a predecessor to Rice Krispie bars. So they were really, from the time I was little and reading these recipe books, just a way to really learn about people and what their lives were like. I pulled out some examples of how this was just interwoven into my family's life. And I'm guessing that for the others as well, this would be the case. And it just happened that when I was going through the minutes, a couple of the years and meetings that I looked at, these things just popped out. So in October of 1936, my mother and her mother-in-law co-hosted a meeting, and I really would have liked to be there. So my sister Marilyn, who was born in 1936, she remembers playing under the table at Swan Creek meetings with her little friends. I think Billy, would it be Billy? Does that mean Jim Haight, Jim Lees, and probably Billy, were you there at these meetings too? And Ann Mant Peterson, who became a lifelong friend. My older brothers don't remember if they played under the table with their little friends or not, but Marilyn definitely remembers that was something that they would do. They'd be at the meeting and they'd be just playing together. November of 1964, my mother hosted a meeting at her home. Maybe Carol was there, who knows? I would have been 7. And at that point, we still lived in Lakeview between Oregon and Madison. In May of 1966, the circle hosted a bridal shower for my sister Kathleen, who is deceased now, but she was recognized with a shower. In October of 1976, the circle gave a blanket to my brother John and his prospective wife Mary. I did see a few months later recording a thank you note from them, so that was good. November of 1976, the waterfall in Oregon, which was kind of a big deal in Oregon. It was really our only place other than maybe the main tap or something. What's that? Yeah, Jay and Ann's, right, but I don't think the circle was meeting at those places. My sister Annette showed slides from her summer in Austria as an AFS student, and what I didn't write down there is that the minutes also said that, and she had a display, which if you know Annette now is completely Annette. I mean, she slides, a display, probably would have had a binder, it's all, and she's retired, but a very talented photographer, so she was showing these things from early on. In 1983, there was a bridal shower for Annette, and the minutes noted at the meeting following that my mother added to the minutes that Annette said that she had never met a nicer group of people. So that's kind of foreshadowing because today actually happens to be Annette's 40th wedding anniversary. And Annette is also a member. And she's not here. Can you believe that? She's not here. 1984, bridal shower for me. And I'm guessing I probably have some of the things that I got there. And then now currently myself from 2016 on that I've been a Swan Creek member, where I've been sharing a lot of memories, both from years past, but also forming new memories with people. So the other message that I really gleaned from this, and I think it's important, well, let me ask, how many people were raised in the country? Okay. How many people raised in the country thought that people from town thought that they were just not, that they were better, the people from town were better than the people from the country? Okay, well, not everybody, so that varied. But what I really found in here is that these women were not just farm wives. They were very active in the community. Their minutes reflect generations of awareness and responsiveness to things happening outside their home. They developed formal procedures to regulate activities. They didn't just show up and say, hey, what's going on? They were constantly learning and growing. There was a period of about 20 years, I believe, Carol, where the group was members of an extension group, kind of like a Dane County Extension Homemakers group, which analogy-wise, when I look at the records from that, I think of it a little bit like 4-H for women, and I'm seeing some head sharing. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
No, it was very good, but as you know, Dane County gave up a lot of that stuff because of TVs and stuff where people would get their information.
Right.
It's too bad in a way because they have big groups in them too.
And these were, looking through those minutes, they may have been, learning sessions on canning. They might have been on sewing. They were ways that Extension was helping educate women about things homemaker things.
Yeah, his mother had a group of women come up and Dane County homemakers to show them how to bake bread. So she showed them from scratch, and maybe about 20 women showed up. So it was a very good organization for all these things.
And similarly, I mean, these are things that many women might have learned from their own parents their own mother, maybe back in the day, but there maybe wasn't an institutional way for that to pass on. And we didn't have the YouTube tutorials that could show you the 35 ways to, make brioche or something. So just very different. It was focused on neighborliness, but not at the expense of becoming too large. And what I've been struck by since I've been an adult member is that I think as people moved to moved to the area and learned about Swan Creek, there were times where people would have perhaps liked to join. But the key, really, I think, to the group's enduring nature is that they had very defined ways of allowing people into the group, which could come across as a little bit mean girlish in a way, but I think that it was a way of making sure that there was just a common community of interest, and that it wasn't that, so-and-so got to invite her next door neighbor, but Eileen didn't get to invite her next door neighbor. So I think there were rational and logical, neutral reasons for that. And that these women always valued community service and helping others. And I think if, for those of us who grew up in the country or in a rural setting, you couldn't live on your own. If you didn't have neighbors to share, one thing I find not humorous, but amusing now is, for example, Facebook has a Buy Nothing page. Well, that used to just be where you'd call up and say, well, I've got, a box of clothes that Eileen doesn't need anymore. Could so-and-so use them? It was just the way that you did that. So I think what we see now are some more formalized ways of connecting that were just natural at that point. Lessons for other groups. So I've done this a couple of times, both times so far for women's, primarily women's groups. And I think the key is that the group starts with a shared interest or purpose, but it ends up having other value to the members. So it can be an opportunity for women who are new to a community to meet and socialize with other women. Now, in the case of Swan Creek, it also was very much a way that those women learned the community norms. I'm sure that when Carol was growing up in Illinois, the way that people may have set their table or done something might not have been the same as the way the Swan Creek ladies did it. So, it wasn't, I'm sure, a controlling way, but it was just a way for you to become comfortable with what's this world that you just became part of. It's multi-generational groups, and to me that's really valuable. If you are only hanging around with people your own age, you're going to be really boring and bored. I mean, we need multi-generational groups. So Swan Creek built that in because of the way the legacy worked. You were a charter member or had been extended an invitation, and then your families could go. And we do have a few people who are fourth generation members. I don't know that it'll actually go beyond that, but there are a few that this is, their great-grandmother, their grandma, their mother, or their father, in the case of a granddaughter, were members. And that the need to desire and learn, explore and have fun doesn't have an age limit. You don't have to just sit there and not do fun things. And the Circle's minutes show a lot of fun things. They'd have parties, they'd dress up, they might have a costume party. One of our late members, Barb Stoneman, who passed away last year, I think it was, when we'll talk about COVID, but when we did COVID, St. Patrick's Day, she shows up in a leprechaun hat because it's St. Patrick's Day. So it's just a way that you don't have to act your age. You can be around people that accept you. Similar reasons, guilds, beads, book clubs, whatever it happens to be, people join them for those reasons. So the groups have a purpose, but then people join them. I think that one of the things that is still important and maybe gets overlooked or taken for granted, developing and using leadership skills. So at the point that this was, Swan Creek was formed, 1915, women were not in active leadership roles in many organizations, and certainly not in the workplace. And so over time, these organizations became a way that they could develop and hone those. And I think now, for those of us who are in these current member groups, what we find is that many of us don't want to have to develop or use our leadership skills because we've been doing that our whole career. So I see that as one of the challenges to current groups is people now maybe want to be more of a participant than a leader. But we want to have fun. You don't want to, you're not paid to go to these things. They should be fun, so you should be enjoying them. And then there was COVID. So obviously COVID was a huge thing. And as you could hear from Debbie, for example, her mom was a member from the 40s until the time she passed away at 102, right? I mean, that is an entire lifetime of Wednesday meetings. Even my husband would be, wow, it seems weird that you're not going to Swan Creek. That's after 3 years. So we did make an effort. We had a few Zoom meetings. Carol was at some, Debbie and Gina and Mary Kay, myself. Barb, who at that point was about 100, she had a great-granddaughter that was living with her that helped her participate. So we did try to use technology to allow us. And it wasn't the same. Being distant like that, it was funny because we had our typical Zoom moments, but it just wasn't the same. Once things opened up a little bit, there were certainly different positions and opinions regarding masking and vaccines and that sort of thing. And that's just the same as in the general population. And so how do you accommodate that? And we're old. I mean, when you look at the age of our members, I'm 66. Let's see, my niece Yvette is 58. Your niece-in-law, Mary Kay, is she 50? They're the young ones, So if you look at who's considered great risk, pretty much all of us were at that age where we would have a greater risk. And even if we didn't personally feel that way, we might have a family member that we lived with that we just wanted to keep them safe. So what did we do? Well, we adapted. We had some Zoom meetings. We had a couple of outdoor meetings. We had a few indoor meetings during lulls, and now we're meeting mostly indoors. And it's just the way it is. Who knows what the winter will bring? Will we have people that are again feeling that they need to pull back or not? I don't know. But there's no judgment. People just participate as they feel comfortable, and that's certainly the way the world should operate. What's our future? Our current members range in age from 50 to about 88. Our traditional pool of candidates is dwindling. I've got 2 daughters who are 33 and 36, and there's absolutely no way they would have the time. And it wouldn't be of interest to them as much. It's not what they grew up with. People have other things to do with their time. There's many other ways that people can spend their time, like going to Pinnacle swim classes, right? Our aqua classes, which also serve a social purpose. So there's ways for us to have social outlets. Social media and other technology, there's ways for people to maintain friendships. And I think of this one, a woman I know through another organization. Her mother is 98, and very hard of hearing, went into a nursing home right as COVID hit. But the way that she was able to connect with her family throughout was she just did massive texting all day texting. So we have other ways to keep in contact. And then what's the relevant shared interest? So for those of us that are kind of legacies and have some firsthand memories of Swan Creek, our shared interest is that history. It's what we have. But will that go forward? When I was thinking about this morning, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe we'll just get to the point where we do a Wednesday happy hour or something. And what do you think? We can do that. The value of the circle to current members. I think you heard from the introductions that people have these personal connections. And why do we continue it? It's shared memories and experience. Mary Kay never got to meet her grandma, Amanda. But this is a shared experience that she has with Amanda, even though they never had a physical plane that they existed in. They're multi-generational. So first time I met Carol I was probably 7 years old, and now we're peers. What I find amusing, and maybe Gina might feel the same way, or Mary Kay, is that there's not a lot of places that I still get referred to as a girl. So it might be the Kellor girls, or the Kinney girls, or the Stoneman girls. So you still have that identity. if families and friends move away, but the ladies of the circle are constant. So even if people don't live here physically, they've oftentimes continued to come to the meetings. It can be a safe social space. We don't have to have any pretense. You can wear whatever you want to wear. If Gina just finished riding the horse and comes in, it's fine, right? It's not going to be like, you didn't dress up, Gina. Could you go home? Yeah. We like dessert. That's really a big thing. It's also an opportunity for us often to entertain. How many of us entertain? So Swan Creek is a way you set the table. You get out your good china, if you have it, and you have fun. And I think the themes that the others shared, they're really throughout this. It's a way to remember and be part of their family's history, even if it's a way. So for my mother, who died in 1998, my grandmother died in 1967. My older siblings had many different memories of them because they're older siblings. So for me, the things that I hear about them from people, it's maybe the only way I've heard that information. So it's another way that we're kind of keeping communities alive. We like to have fun, and we like to maintain traditions. It's just, anything I missed from these about why people join? Any? Yeah. So what can lessons, this is my little soapbox here, because what could Fitchburg residents or others learn from the ladies of Swan Creek? Well, I think that they can learn, and this is important, I think, to help people understand this odd thing called Fitchburg as a city, is that Fitchburg has a long history of informal neighborhoods. Where I lived, it was considered Lakeview. There was the Swan Creek neighborhood. There were these neighbors. Catherine, you had friends. Where you lived, it was a network. It was people who worked together. So we might not have had formal names, and it might not have had street names that was, the developer's daughters or whatever, but they had neighborhoods. And we still have neighborhoods. Just because we don't have a city center doesn't mean we don't have shared identities. So that makes it difficult. There's no, downtown Fitchburg. You can create something you call uptown, but it's not going to be the same as something that's had a historical legacy. The Fitchburg Senior Center, I've done some activities there, and I'm really impressed. They do a really excellent job of having activities and welcoming people. And we know, in fact, I've got a friend that I met at the Fitchburg Senior Center who's new to the area. And it's a way for either people who are new to the community or that are part of the community already to come together and share activities and interests. So what could Fitchburg do for other age cohorts that aren't maybe library age? Are there things that could be done to kind of help form these connections? And the part that I think that's important is that most of us in this room probably aren't Fitchburg natives. We come from our own backgrounds. But you may have the same kind of background in your family's life. And so when we're looking at how can we help current Fitchburg connect with each other, some of these shared experiences are ways that we might be able to do that. And I think as a board, we're excited because we've kind of started on some new activities with the library, where we'll be working with them on some activities that have a shared interest, and that the library will be helping to take a role in planning that will be a way for people to come together. And I think that's a real exciting opportunity. So this was the April 2019 meeting. We were at Benvenuto's. Anybody who takes pictures there know you don't want to be in the front because it's just a horrible place to be for a photo. But this was the occasion of my sister Christine. Where is this mouse? Well, she's down in that lower right-hand corner. Who lived on McGaw Road. She and her husband moved to the Portland, Oregon area where her daughter lives. So this was a very rare event where we had, I think, everybody, all the current members. So it was great. We miss many of the people. One of our greatest losses is Barb Stoneman, who married into the Stoneman family, so she got to join and she joined after she retired. So again, these weren't people that necessarily were members from a young age. But one of the things that Barb brought was this huge wealth of historical experienced. She was 100 years old. Her family home was one of the first homes in Tacoma. So when we would share stories about, tell us a memory about school, things like that, she just had these amazing histories. We've got Blaney's, we've got Kinney's, we've got a couple Kellors, we've got a Clark, we've got the Larsons over here. So we have a lot of the core people of Swan Creek. This was a meeting a few years prior to that where we made mastectomy pillows, and I love this one because look at how people are laughing. You know, they're having fun. We were making mastectomy pillows, and someone probably someone taking the photo said something silly, and we all just were laughing. And I think that kind of embodies why a lot of us still continue, is that it's a group of women, it's a time we enjoy, and we like spending time together. So before I take any questions, I'm just going to say we've got cake that's provided by Swan Creek because we were going to have a jubilee of some sort when we hit 105 and then COVID. So this is our belated COVID delayed jubilee. We have a lot of things spread around that are Swan Creek history, and there were a few people here taking some cell phone photos that, you know, their family members had participated, and we really want to welcome. There are nut cups. Not as fancy as the ones that we would have perhaps been expected to provide. But any questions or any observations or comments anybody else would like to share? Yes.
Any early days was before women could vote. Was there any talk of that in the minutes at all about first voting? Or, I mean, the politics, of course, was just school. I mean, you gotta be careful with politics and groups, I'm sure, 100 years ago as well. But any talk about kind of the voting or the societal changes of women in the notes at all?
You know, I haven't read through all the minutes. I skimmed some. Carol, do you remember? You've prepared a lot of materials for.
Yeah, I don't recall offhand.
I'd be surprised if it wasn't a topic.
Because it was such a prominent thing at the time.
Right. And the detail in the minutes varied. You know, now we have a lot of description of what the dessert was and the table settings and maybe some humorous anecdotes, but many of the earlier minutes were a little bit more businesslike.
I have one other question, if you don't mind. So during World War II, Fitchburg obviously sent troops over. Any talk of doing any quilts, anything for those that deceased, or any back stuff in the notes at all, or not? Or Vietnam, or any of that kind of stuff?
Carol, do you?
Well, I must have come across this, but I wrote it in 2015. It was actually a poem I wrote.
Oh, can you hear
Anyway, I
Carol?
will just.
Give her the mic. If you
Can I, do I need to talk on? Okay, I wrote this in 2015 because it was our 100th anniversary. And I did include this in there. Let's see. I'll start. They began piecing quilts for daughters getting married, while sons received blankets their hands never tarried. Then back down further, they knitted wool scarves and mittens and socks and carefully placed them all in the box. Overseas they would go to our men in the war to build up their spirits while keeping them warm. To the capital they went and put bandages together. They were still talking about that at some of the meetings, and help where they could regardless of weather. Hospital garments were made for the servicemen ill and given to the Red Cross to give out at will. Let's see if I have anything else on that.
That's great. That's great.
Again came the warriors with World War II, and circle knitted Afghans for the wounded so true. Scrapbooks were made for the USO to send news from home with photos to show. Activities of circles have changed through the years, but its main goal of neighborliness still endures. A beautiful tied quilt can be made in a hurry with Kay Kinney's expertise. We never need worry. As we sit in a circle, we remember those in need and do what we can to assist with good deeds. For 100 years, our club has been true to friendship and service and lots of fun, too.
Yes. Yeah. So I know there were a couple people who had early family members. Anything that you'd like to share about your memories or what it meant to your family? And don't feel you have to. I just want to give you that opportunity if you're interested. Oh, well, Bill raised his hand, and then we'll.
When I was about 3 or maybe 4, we had a meeting at the farmhouse in Irish Lane, and when it was over, Mrs. Mant went out to go home, and she had a flat tire. And Ann and I were playing out there, and of course we got accused of causing up in the air on the tires. We keep Ann at the farm. But of course I was innocent as I always have been.
Always.
How old were you, the two of you?
Oh, probably about 4.
Yeah, that's what you told me.
And you'd never do that.
Oh,
would you?
no.
No,
No. Yeah. How about, are you?
I can mention, you mentioned the Beal family from Wooding. Actually, I'm gonna give you the spot, Janice. So our grandmother was Gladys Beal, the Clemens, and Hinshoes and all that. But anyway, the Beal family from Wooding actually dates back to our family from 1821 in England.
Wow.
So that's the story behind it.
Do you still make it?
Up to our mother's death, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Anybody else or any other questions that people have? And we know Bill would never let the air out of a tire or do anything of that nature. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I remember going to Stoneman's for eggs all the time. And they had a big white farmhouse, and we would just go out there all the time to buy eggs. My mom was Donna Meyer, Grandma was Gladys Beal, so, and the Clemens and the Hinshoes were all family. And I remember when I got married, I got a green mixer, you know, a little electric hand mixer, olive green. I still have that thing. That is the only mixer I still use, and so obviously I don't bake much. I still have that. Some great memories. My mom absolutely treasured this group, and she passed away in 2015, which would have been counted here.
I'm just stunned that where I come from, a very similar rural community in La Crosse County, Lutherans and Germans, Lutherans and Catholics, but not as many Catholics, I guess, where I come from. There's a lot of Lutherans and Presbyterians and stuff. But I'm just, circles back where I'm from are mostly related to the church, you know, and things like that. And I was just stunned, not stunned, but surprised that this was kind of not part of that social network for people. Any thoughts of that at all?
Yeah, actually, thanks for mentioning that, because that's one of the points that I was struck by too, is that this was ecumenical. I mean, it was fine. It was Catholic, it was Lutheran, it was Methodist. And people had their church groups. Like as a kid, I would sometimes get confused between Sewing Circle and the Altar Society. And then I finally realized the Altar Society ladies came at night and the Sewing Circle was during the day. But, you know, they were different. So there might have been some overlap. And I think that maybe was unusual. I don't know. Carol, you were part of was it the Mothers Club at the school? I guess the other part too I wanted to note is that you didn't have to be married or have kids to be in this group. So that was something that if you might have been more limiting in your opportunities for other groups.
No, I don't remember any. I know one woman who belonged to Dane County. One woman who belonged to Dane County, actually homemakers. She did write a prayer if anybody wanted to use it, but it wasn't specific. I mean, it was a prayer, and we have used it in our club. But anybody could use it, but you didn't have to. Otherwise, they never specified anything about religion, Lutherans, Catholics, or whatever. You know.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, because that was one of the points I wanted to make, is that this was a group. It didn't matter what your religion was or wasn't. You could be a member. Anything else anybody has? Any other comments or observations? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it was because of the mothers of the school, you know, the country school that actually started it. So I think it came from the school based. But over in our neighborhood, which is Goodland Park Road, Lawler Road, and that portion of MM, They also had Swan Creek Community Club, which was the husbands and the wives got together on the first Sunday of the month and played cards. Now, I don't know if the whole club knew it, but we used those trays. They used these trays also. And so it could be that it stayed at our house until, you know, the card club was over, and then we had to take it to the next, you know, place that the homemakers were meeting. But I think too, there, the husbands and wives, it was a smaller area, just right in, you know, a couple miles, you know, area that the men came to and played cards, and the wives played cards.
And I think if you were looking at the kind of where these families came from, the area that Swan Creek was mostly English speaking, and it was, you know, probably currently, you look at those names, those aren't German names, those aren't Norwegian names, which you might find as you go farther out and down, or they weren't exclusively Irish. So it was just a more mixed area in that regard.
But not to be scandalous, but what if a daughter and a son, a divorce happened? Could they stay in the group or not?
I don't know. So the question was, what if the key would be, if the daughter-in-law was there because she married the son, could the daughter-in-law stay if they divorced?
Let's just say if your parents would have divorced now, what would happen?
Yeah. Anybody have any memory of that? I know. Eric's saying it probably never happened, at least not then. Yeah. Well, anything else? Yeah.
I just want to say you do an excellent job, Eileen, and thank you for the circle members being here. It was so interesting. You did an excellent job.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity. And like I said, this wasn't my idea. It wasn't self-serving, but Tom Hubble, who's a former city planner, actually is the one who said, well, why don't we do something about Swan Creek? Because we look at what programs. And I then said, well, I already have a PowerPoint that I can adapt. So, yeah. So thank you, everybody. Feel free to have cake and water and look at some interesting items.